Hey everybody, welcome to the Friday episode of the Dogman Bandits. I'm Orrin Phillips, and today we are speaking to Dennis Mallonee. Dennis is the founder of Heroic Publishing, and he did the book The Champions in the 80s. He also has worked on various other projects for Marvel, and is continuing to publish comics now. And he does the Heroic Voice YouTube show, which is a really interesting show, talking to different creators, independent creators, and all sorts of comic folks. So, without further ado, here's Dennis. Dennis Mallonee. Dennis, how are you, sir?
I'm good, thank you.
So we'll start with the question we ask everybody. How did you first discover comics?
My older brother had some in his room, and I found them and started reading them and was fascinated by them. Being only like 3 years old, I'd never seen such a thing before. Although I had seen the Superman TV show. Oh, he has a book about him, so that was interesting.
And how did you, in later on in life, make the decision that you wanted to get into the industry yourself?
It was mostly by accident. I always liked comic books, and when an opportunity to, produce one presented itself, I took it. So it was not something that I had specifically planned to do, but when opportunity arises, go for it.
I want to start a little bit talking about the work you did with Marvel on the Handbook to the Marvel Universe.
Yeah,
Rick
that was
Hoberg.
a long time ago.
So, talk a little about, did they pitch this idea to you, or did you pitch the idea to them?
No, it was actually an idea that I had pitched to them a long time before they actually started doing the handbooks.
Mhm.
What it was in the oh gosh, when was it? It was maybe the late 70s, right? I thought that it might be useful to them to have a chronology on hand. So I suggested to them that, we should go over, all of the old comic books, figure out which ones happen in which sequence, and, just give them a master calendar that they could refer to if they ever needed to go back and, tap into some old stories. This kind of evolved into the handbook because part and parcel of that was also summaries of the various characters, abilities, powers, backgrounds, things like that. We never did the chronology as such, but the handbook portion of it, a few years later, you know, we did.
Did Marvel open sort of the vaults to you to dig deep to get
No,
the
I had a complete collection of every Marvel comic book at the time, so it made it easy.
Oh, there you go. What I mean, a lot of these characters have such deep lore. How did you try to compact that to sort of, I want to say bite size, but sizes to fit into what they were looking for?
The lore was not so deep back in the 70s.
True.
That was what now, 55 years ago?
Hmm.
50 years ago.
Hmm.
So it wasn't that hard. There weren't that many comics up until Cadence expansion. Marvel only produced, a handful of superhero books every month. That expanded to 12 a month in 68, right? But it wasn't until a few years later that they started using the old publishing model and just throwing everything out there, as many books as they could produce. They were bound by contractual restrictions with their distributor not to produce more than 12 books a month for quite a long time.
You know what? As a fan of comics, being able to work for Marvel at the time, that must have been quite the thrill.
Not really.
Oh,
Uh,
really?
no, I mean, it's just something to do.
Hmm.
Um, Actually writing, you know, a few stories later on, that was fun. But the early part of it was more kind of a service kind of thing, something that I thought might be useful to them.
So from there, I know, there was the champion role-playing game, and from what I read is that um there was a demand by fans to take these characters into a comic book, and you sort of
Hmm.
answered the call of the fans
Yes.
and took it upon yourself.
Yeah, that happened at a San Diego convention where the Hero Games people were giving a panel, and they got asked, as they evidently often did, when are you going to do a comic book about that? And since I was sitting in the audience and I was already publishing some stuff, okay, I'll do it. Right? And that's what I referred to. That was how it happened by accident. We went down to the floor and went to Eclipse, Dean Mallonee and Cat Ironwood,
Mm,
and basically pitched it to them. I'll do a comic book with the Champions role-playing game. You guys want to publish it?
mm.
Because even though I was doing publishing, I didn't really know how to do comic books at the time. So I figured we'd better go through, somebody who did know how to actually publish the comics. And that was a learning experience for me. I did learn how to publish comic books. So, a year or so later, we shifted into doing our own.
What was the biggest, thing that you felt that you needed to learn about publishing comics?
Distribution, who the best printers were,
Mhm.
and how to go about actually putting the comic book together, how to get the story, the artwork, the lettering, the coloring, all into one coherent piece, and then ship it off to the publisher. At that time, after getting the orders from Diamond and whatever other distributors there were at the time, I think Capital City was around at that time. There were a couple of others that were still active.
From the role-playing game to the comic book itself, what were some changes that you felt you wanted to make to the characters or the overall story to make it fit better into a comic?
Oh, you're asking me to dig way back at that time. Well, translating characters who were created for a role-playing game into viable characters for a comic book meant that I needed to go beyond the basic characters, and given the backstory that I was provided by their creators, expand upon that to the point that there would be enough history, some background that could be slowly revealed over time to add that kind of depth to the characters. I guess I'm kind of going circular here. But as I've explained on several different occasions, the original concept for the Champions comic book was a large-sized 52-page book that would contain stories in the first 4 issues about the individual characters in order to provide that backstory that would be needed in order to make them interesting to the fans. In issues 5 and 6, we would bring them all together into a team up, right? A big, 2-part, 44 plus 44 pages, 88-page story in several chapters, to let the heroes strut their stuff, tying all of those earlier stories together into that big climax. But Eclipse didn't want to do that. No, we just want a superhero comic book, 6 issues, normal size. Let's see if we can do it in our, $1.25 format. And, you know, so that didn't pan out, but I still, I had most of those stories, early stories written. So we just took, the big multi-part epic and expanded it a little bit, actually contracted it a little bit because there was more that I wanted to do in there,
Mhm.
and fit it into those 6 page issues.
You were speaking just a moment ago about sort of this world building idea that you had. How do you sort of, when you're doing that, kind of put blinders on yourself and focus on certain things and then kind of get it all together?
I'm not sure what you're asking. Could you
Well,
rephrase that maybe?
so basically, you have to focus on the characters, but at the same time in your mind, you have this whole new world that you want to create for all these different characters. How do you sort of just focus on individual characters first and then put the world together?
Stories.
Okay.
Flair, I would need to tell the story of when Flair was a little girl,
Mhm.
learning about her powers. And those stories actually ended up as secondary stories, backup stories in the first 3 issues of Flair.
Mhm.
Um, for the Huntsman, I needed to basically give his origin story, how he went from being a military person to donning the costume. Those stories ended up appearing in the first 3 issues of the Marksman comic book, which was his original name.
Mhm.
I started out I would start out with him as a superhero, showing him in action because he was the first of this new generation of heroes.
Mhm.
So all I really needed to do was show him being a superhero. And those stories ended up as backup features in the first couple of issues of the second Champion series, the one that we started doing after the miniseries.
Mhm.
Giant's origin story appeared in Champions Annual #1. We actually had a couple of Foxbat stories, Flying Fox, that ended up appearing. There was a story about his first encounter with Flair that ended up in Champions #8, I think.
Mhm.
There were a couple of other Foxbat stories that ended up being used later. So it was really a case of figuring out how to present the characters in ways that would appeal to readers, that they would understand, that didn't need a lot of background, that in fact actually provided the background during the course of the stories. Once that was there, made sense, right?
Mhm.
The fans know the characters. So issues 5 and 6 with the League of Champions,
Mhm.
um, they'd, maybe be thrilled by that because all the characters we'd introduced were now all of a sudden all together.
When you're creating a character, how do you start the blueprint to do it? Is it a name? Is it an ability? Is it a characteristic trait? How do you start building a character up?
Uh, there's no rule for that.
Mhm.
Um, with the role-playing game characters, I already had the characters. I had the characters, their powers, their background
Right.
that the creators had provided. Um, I also was playing Champions at the time, which why I was intrigued. I still do play Champions,
Mhm.
which was I intrigued. I was intrigued by doing the comic book because I was familiar with the game, and in fact, had written several game supplements for
Mhm.
the Champions role-playing game. The Coriolis Effect, the Great Supervillain Contest. I contributed to Enemies books. Um, so I was very much familiar with the rules. And because I'd been playing Champions, I had my own characters. Dr. Arcane and Lady Arcane, who were in the original series, were my own creations.
Right.
Um, and during the course of writing stories for Heroic Publishing, I had that whole history of characters that I created to draw on.
Mhm.
The Winsome Whipperette, who has her own Kickstarter going at the moment. Plenty of other characters, villains.
Mhm.
The Amazing Darkon, villains that Flair encountered. Sky Marshal, um, the Dash. That was before the Incredibles. We had the name first. It's so it wasn't hard. It's the same process, right? You sort of have an idea in mind of who the characters are, and once you start writing stories about them, you've got to think a little bit about how they got to that point. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, no, definitely. What was the fan reaction like initially to the comics when they came out?
Well, initially, I was told by Eclipse that that first issue of Champions had like 25,000 in
Mhm.
orders. It, as they always do, trickled off after that. The first couple of issues were not as good as I would have liked.
Mhm.
The With the third issue, when Chris Marinan came on board and we got Del Barris as the inker, the artwork was better.
Right.
But with that kind of stuff, you've got that built-in decline because retailers will order at the time, probably still true, they will order more of the first issue than they will of the second issue or the third
Mhm.
issue because they assume that sales are going to drop off
Mhm.
and they're not willing to risk ordering any more copies than they think they need to. Um, Flair, that first issue, had the same kind of effect.
Mhm.
That was the first comic book that we actually had to go to a second printing for. But again, right after that first issue, sales dropped off. But with Flair, they kind of actually didn't drop off all that much.
Mhm.
So Flair was our first, what should I say, really successful comic book.
Mhm.
When we started doing, the hero comics with Captain Thunder and Eternity Smith and the Champions book, and later, the Huntsman, well, the Marksman is the
Mhm.
original title. Those didn't really sell like gangbusters. Flair did.
Right.
So that was
At
cool.
a writer, looking back, are there certain issues or certain things that happened that you sort of saw yourself evolve as a writer in your style and your storytelling?
Just more experience. You
Hmm.
know, I look back at the stories that I wrote and they're good. They're not bad. There were things I would have changed, but it didn't have the crispness, I guess,
Hmm.
or the convolutions in the plot. The stuff that you slip into one issue sort of to prepare for stuff that you're not actually going to get into, foreshadowing. There was some foreshadowing in those early books, but not to the extent that it happens today. And I've had fans tell me this, right? Hey, you wrote about that like you're 10 issues ago. And so, you kind of prepare the way. One other thing here that doesn't get done much
Hmm.
in today's comic books is that even if it's a continuing story, I try to, don't always succeed, but I try to keep the particular story that we're doing self-contained. Right. So even if there are elements of it that will continue on, that particular story, you should be able to read on its own without necessarily having to know either what happened before or, you know, what's going to happen next.
Right.
Um, you know, and I don't know how well I succeed with that. I'm maybe too close to it, but you know, that's what I try to do.
Once you started to publish your, with Heroic Publishing, you talked about Eternity Smith and other books. Did you feel you were ready to take on that role to put out your own comics?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd been publishing fantasy book, an illustrated science fiction and fantasy magazine. I'd had to act in an editorial capacity
Hmm.
with a whole bunch of talented, fantasy and science fiction writers,
Hmm.
and just seeing how they did it and what they did wrong,
Right.
which happened in a lot of
Hmm.
cases. That was instructive, and, as far as the proper techniques for writing goes. Fiction, you know, prose fiction is a little bit different animal than comic book fiction, but the techniques are there. You still need the beginning of the story, the middle of the story, the denouement. You need to write, particularly in a short story, no words should be wasted. You go, right through it, telling the story as economically as possible.
Hmm.
As I said, no wasted words.
Right.
And that is the same kind of art that you need for a good comic book story. A good comic book story is, in fact, a short story,
Hmm.
unless you're telling an extended novella in a comic book format, which is done, right? There are some good, 6, 8, 10 issue, 12 issue stories that happen in a comic book. And those are more novellas than short stories. As far as full-scale novels go, I've not seen much of that in the comic book format.
Hmm.
That would be like a 25 issue story arc, which I just don't see much of. Um, there are some people who try that. The Warlock story arcs that Jim Starlin did were sort of framed in that kind of way,
Hmm.
the later ones. But I don't really think Jim was quite successful in presenting it, if that's what he was even trying to do.
Right. When you're running your own publishing house, when you were looking to bring on talent, what were some of the things you were looking for from prospective, employees? What were some of the aspects that you were looking for in their work?
We don't have employees as such. Let me catch you there. They're all
Mhm.
freelance.
Okay.
They're talented people. I don't look much for artists.
Mhm.
I have enough artists coming to me, that it's not at all difficult to
Mhm.
find people whose work I like.
Right.
Um, and that happens all the time. Unfortunately, let me phrase it this way. I do not want to encourage people to make submissions because we don't have a lot of work right
Right.
now. Um, it's it's rare that I actually find somebody so talented that I think I have to use him.
Mhm.
Uh, so, you know, by all means, if you really want to work with heroic publishing characters,
Mhm.
send me samples, but I can't promise
Right.
anything to anybody right now. I wish I could. I just can't.
Do you have a favorite title from Heroic Publishing that you guys did?
A favorite title, or do you
Mhm.
mean a favorite character? I mean, what are you
Let's say
actually asking?
character.
My favorite character is Rose,
Okay.
Psyche. Um, we haven't been able to do much with her.
Mhm.
We did some with her, but just the idea of a young, psychic detective who's testing her powers, right? Trying to figure out how they work by solving mysteries and going up against people she may be overmatched against.
Mhm.
I mean, that seems to me to be a very appealing conflict in the character, right?
Right.
She's getting herself in trouble. She's getting herself in over her head. And the question is, can she actually handle it? So far, yeah,
Mhm.
but it's a test. It's a challenge for her.
Mhm.
We expanded on that concept with Witch Girls Incorporated, teaming her up with the Black Enchantress. Black Enchantress is the bad girl, Rose is the good girl,
Mhm.
right? And they complement each other. They have different occult powers, and they work well together, and they both like solving mysteries. Um, the Black Enchantress figures the world's her oyster, right? It belongs to her.
Mhm.
So even though she's actually a bad guy, she will do good things because if there's a worse guy out there, she doesn't want him, causing her trouble.
Right.
So, you know, the champions make use of her in that regard, even though they keep an eye on her and they know that they can use her if there's, somebody really bad poking his head into our world.
Is it, in this day and age where we're seeing so many independent books out there, how are you, keeping your name out there and keeping the books out there in the public's eye?
We have social media. I try, although I don't always succeed, to post something every day.
Right.
You can follow us on Facebook, on X, on pretty much any other. We were on Blue Sky,
Mhm.
Gab, Minds, Locals, Getter, um, Truth Social.
Mhm.
Um, and we have our own website, right? We put previews of up and coming books on the website. If you're curious about a particular title, even though it may be quite a ways off in the future,
Mhm.
we will post the work that's been done on it so that you can see it. If you want to know what the Liberty Girl's up to, go to the website. Take a look at Liberty Girl. If you want to know what's coming up for Flair, right? Go there, take a look. Want to know what's coming up for the Black Enchantress or um, in Heroic Spotlight. We even have an all-girl heroes league in the
Mhm.
book in the works. Even though I haven't heard from the artist in a while, he's been incommunicado, which kind of worries me. So I got to find him and find out what's going on. Uh, so it's all there.
And you also do the Heroic Voice show as well.
Well,
Uh,
that's aimed more toward giving other comic book creators a platform to promote their work,
right.
right? And we did one with you,
Mhm.
you know, and thank you for returning the favor. I
No problem.
appreciate it. And we try to do one of those each week, 30 minutes or so.
Mhm.
Um, and you can find that on our YouTube channel. Just do a search on YouTube for Heroic Voice.
Mhm.
We get obscure people, we get people who have some reputation, and we get some old time comic book stars on there. It's great. It's a whole mix of things.
Has there been one guest that you just couldn't believe that you actually got on the show, or have you had did you have
No, I have contacts with people.
okay.
I've been in the industry for a long time. There are
Mhm.
people I'd like to get. I keep trying to get Larry Houston, right? But Larry keeps like, oh, I'm sorry, I've got so much mail, I didn't see that. We'll get him eventually.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but who have we had recently? We've had, um, gosh, I'm terrible with names. I'm so sorry. We've had Roy. We've had Roy Thomas. We've
Mhm.
had Stephen Grant recently.
Mhm.
Um, We've had the current X-Men editor.
Mhm.
Um, God, I'm so terrible with names. I'm so sorry. I apologize.
Is it? I mean, what I like about your show so much is it's sort of a different perspective because it's two people. It's you and your guest who are both in the industry. Talking about it from two very professional ways, as opposed to a fan asking questions. You guys kind of go at it as talking about the industry itself.
Yeah, we do industry talk sometimes. It's really I try to be more focused on what the creator is doing lately,
Mhm.
and particularly if he has a Kickstarter going, I want to point people to that. But we'll get into interesting industry jabber,
Mhm.
right? So there are a lot of people who knew Stan, for example, and if there's stories to share, and an opportunity comes up, we'll share those stories.
Mhm.
Um, you know,
What are your thoughts on the current industry right now?
I hate it.
Okay.
There are a lot of people who do good work, but you know, I kind of alluded to this. People in the industry these days don't really know how to tell stories.
Mhm.
They run characters through their paces, right? They try to come up with conflict, whether it's genuine conflict or just made up conflict. It's all about, putting characters through their paces and trying to find something for them to do. And that's not storytelling
Right.
by and large. Um, so I hate to say it, but with some few exceptions, there are people who do good work. By and large, the stories are not good.
Right. Do you think that's why the rise of the independent comic books to be a Kickstarter or Indiegogo and stuff has sort of taken off so well because people do want those alternatives now to what's
I
being
think
put out
there are a
there?
lot of people out there who recognize the fact that, that from comic books from the big guys just aren't as good as they ought to be. So they are looking for other things. And let me encourage people to do this. Go to
Mhm.
Kickstarter, go to Indiegogo, go to any of the other funding platforms. Look for something that looks interesting to you and back it.
Right.
Put some money in the project. It's
Mhm.
You'll get good stuff, you'll get rewards, and you'll help produce, if you like it, it's going to be a good comic book.
Right.
We hope. So
Do you have a dream team? Like if you had an artist and a writer that you could put together to put onto one of your books, who would it be?
they're dead.
Oh, yeah. Well,
I would have loved to have got John Buscema to do something with us, but he was exclusive to Marvel. We did manage to work with George Perez for a little while.
Mhm.
That would be great. I would have loved to be able to get, well, Roy's not dead. I would have loved to be able to get Roy and George together on something.
Oh, yeah.
That would have been a hoot. I worked with Dick Giordano for a little bit. He was the regular Tigress artist until he passed away.
Mhm.
But that having been said, I should give a plug to Dick's assistant. Um, God damn it, I am so stupid with names. Um, he's our regular Liberty Girl artist now.
Okay.
God damn it. Pardon my French.
That's all right.
Oh, Lord, give me a second. I'm
Sure.
gonna look. I can find it. I'm sure I can.
Oh, no problem. I'll put a cut point here, but yeah, that's fine.
Okay, yeah, if you want to break away, I'm gonna find his name. If you can cut this part out and
Yeah,
just
yeah.
leave
I put a
that
time code
straight.
down so I know how to cut it there.
Okay, Liberty Girl. Rob Jones. And Rob has really brought his game up a notch. He did a Liberty Girl story for us, and he helped Dick, doing the inks on some of the Tiger stories that Rick did. And he actually finished the last Tiger story that Dick was working on before he passed away. But with the latest Liberty Girl stuff that Rob has done, it's nice. It's really great. Um, so, you know, I'm happy to be working with Rob. He tells the story exactly, the way I envision it.
Mhm.
And the characters, the drawings are really pretty. I would encourage people to go to the website, take a look at the Liberty Girl stuff that's up there. You'll see what
Mhm.
I'm talking
I just want to ask quickly because you hear so many people have such wonderful things to say about Mr. Giordano that he was just one of the nicest, kindest people
about. Wonderful man.
in the world. And just if you had a couple of stories or your thoughts on Mr. Giordano.
Uh, I didn't know him very well.
Mm-hmm.
We worked kind of remotely. I only met him a few times at conventions.
Mm-hmm.
And how it happened was, basically, hey Dick, you want to do something? I said, sure. What do you have in mind? So uh, that's how nice he was. He was looking for stuff to do that wasn't with Marvel or DC at the time. He wanted to, kind of spread his wings and do something else. So, he did. We were working at the time on the Chaos Gods storyline in League of Champions.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked him if he might want to do the Tigress and Dr. Arcane chapter, which he said, yeah, love to. And I was so impressed with his, Tigress work, that I asked him if he wanted to just do that character on a regular basis. So he
Mm-hmm.
did. Um, you know,
I
things
like it.
happen serendipitously.
Yeah. I wonder, is there a character that you would have loved to have had a shot at doing a run on?
Submariner.
Oh, okay.
Submariner, when I first started reading comic books, it seemed to me that they just weren't doing him right.
Mm-hmm.
Right? This was not Bill Everett's Submariner.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Stan and Gene, did an adequate job with him, but that was not Namor.
Right.
I don't know who that was. Um, you know, Bill, nothing to do with Atlantis. That whole storyline. It was a hidden kingdom down in Antarctica. Submariners, people who lived underwater, and the if you want to read really good Submariner stories, grab the work that Bill did in the 50s
Mm-hmm.
with that short run, um, and from 53 to 56 or so.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful stuff. And that was the Submariner that I remembered. That was the one character that I grew up with. Roy reprinted those books in Fantasy Masterpieces and Marvel Superheroes. So they're there more cheaply if you can find those.
Mm-hmm.
But that was the Submariner that I wanted to do, take him back to his roots. You know,
What where
Also
would
Green Lantern. I liked Green
oh,
Lantern. I would have loved to have been able to do some Green Lantern stuff.
which ever Green Lantern?
The original one, Alan, not Hal. Hal's great,
Right.
but Alan was the best Green Lantern.
Mm-hmm.
He was Alan was wonderful. Right? He was big, he was burly, and he hit people. I asked his creator,
Mm-hmm.
again, terrible with names,
Mm-hmm.
why Alan wore his ring on his left hand.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And he told me, well, because he would hit people with his right hand. Right? So
There you go.
the ring would have, like really hurt him if he hit him with the hand with the ring on it. But that was what was cool about Alan. And he originally had a very limited power set.
Mm-hmm.
Right? He could fly. He was immune to metals.
Right.
Um, he, created flame. Right?
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't the, genie magic
Mm-hmm.
that Hal had when John Broome started writing the character later on.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the characteristics expanded, as other writers, took over the thing during the war, didn't understand the character, his power set grew. Um, and instead of it being power over metals, right, which was why he was vulnerable to wood
Right.
and plastics, they just decided he'd be vulnerable to wood, which wasn't really what Martin O'Dell
Okay.
had in mind when he created the character. The Aladdin story was, in fact, the inspiration for Green Lantern, right? The
Mm-hmm.
lamp, and the ring, right? So that was there,
Right.
and as most people are well aware, the original name Mart had for him was Alan Ladd, right? But you know, DC thought that was silly. It was only a couple of years later that the actor came on the scene with the name Alan Ladd, so they settled on Alan Scott, right, as the name.
Turned out all right. I'm curious because you've mentioned before, you've done solo heroes and you've done team books as well. Is there one that you prefer over the other?
What do you mean?
As far as writing goes, doing a story just about one character or a team book.
Oh, I see what you're asking. There's a synergy there. Unless
Mhm.
you understand the individual characters, the team doesn't work.
Right.
You have to write individual stories in order to be able to bring them together reasonably as a team.
Mhm.
Um, there are, as my vice president, Dave Berg, pointed out when he did a little video for, I've got a copy here actually of our Tales of the Champions book, our
Mhm.
most recent issue, right, which is a Kickstarter going for right now, which if you could link to, I'd really appreciate. Uh, he pointed out that having characters who don't normally meet each other,
Mhm.
right, like in this little sequence here, you need to know how they're likely to interact so that you can actually write a reasonable interaction. If you have, say, the Whipperette,
Mhm.
who draws her powers from a source that's antithetical to the magic of the Olympians,
Mhm.
you need to have one of the Olympians react to the fact that there's a person here who has magic that they don't like. Right? So we have Hermia actually pulling a knife on the Whipperette, saying, I should just gut you and feed your entrails to, animals.
Mhm.
And she's going, you could try. It's a nice little bit,
Right.
right? Yeah. So, um, it's that kind of thing. If you don't understand the individual characters, if you don't write stories about the individual characters, you can't really do a team book.
Right. Makes sense to me. Where can people, because you mentioned this issue as well, where can people find out more about the upcoming projects as well? You mentioned the website, but
The website,
social
that's
media?
where you do it, right? And follow us on social media because every time we get something new, we post it up there to let people know it exists.
And we're back. That's pretty cool to see how, we went to took on the role-playing games to create comics for it. It's a really interesting story. And he continues to do some great work. And I really suggest you guys check out the Heroic Voice on YouTube. And so thank you, Dennis, for stopping by. And thank you guys for listening. And we will see you next week. One episode next week, Thanksgiving week. We're going to make it a great one for you. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you soon. Bye.